Budget Committee meeting for June 10th, 2021 to order. And Mr. Melky, if you'll walk us through the agenda for today.
Can do. Good morning, Commissioners. We're going to start off with the American Rescue Plan Act. It is where we will probably start most of our meetings for a while now as we navigate through guidance and everything else that's out there. We did receive the first half of our funds on Monday. We got $6.318 million into our accounts. At this point, based on what we know about guidance today, we can invest these, we can retain the interest earned or the investment money earned. I expect that guidance will eventually change where those funds can only be used for whatever the guidance says we can use them for. But at this point, it's kind of open. So we're going to try and get some kind of return off of them while we're sitting and waiting for what we're going to do with those funds. Interest rates are horrible right now. We'll get into that as we get further on. I don't anticipate that we'll get much out of this. Some key dates for the funds. Right now, we're able to request the funds, which we were able to do. Starting on July 16th, we talked about last time the interim final rule. Comments from counties and associations and townships and cities are due by July 16th on that guidance. So our first report that we have to send back to Treasury is August 31st. I will be very impressed if they have final guidance to us by then. Based on how CARES went, I anticipate there being significant changes throughout. Right now, we don't even have what the reports are going to look like, what kind of buckets they want us to put the funds into when we report. We just know that we are supposed to report August 31st, and any projects over $50,000, we need to provide details to Treasury on what those are. If we aren't investing the funds, it should be a fairly simple report to send in that we haven't done anything with them yet, but that is 2 months away, so there is, or almost 3. So we could be utilizing the funds by then, but until we get reporting structure, it will be challenging for us to know how these will be bucketed. From there, in October, we'll start our quarterly reporting to Treasury. That will be our first one, and every quarter after that, we'll have to submit a report to Treasury on where the funds are being invested throughout the community. December 31st, 2024, like we talked last meeting, is when all funds must be incurred or obligated. It no longer is everything needs to be spent by that date. If we have a project that runs beyond that point and we know what the cost is going to be, we can incur the funds and we can still spend them after that point. We have till 2026 to spend all of the funds, but we have to have them incurred beforehand. If it is for a project, that project has to be completed by the end of 2026 in order to qualify. I don't anticipate that we'll make it that far, but that is the opportunity for us if we do have a broadband project that runs long. We're able to still fund that even without being able to complete the project before that 24 deadline. Any questions on ARPA?
Have they been pretty clear on what's going to qualify for these funds?
It's fairly broad, but it is fairly clear that everything needs to be COVID related, but that gets pretty expansive when they start going down the mental health aspects of it. So we can utilize the funds to deal with mental health issues that resulted from the pandemic, substance abuse, a number of other programs within that. So it's clear as mud, realistically. Probably the clearest portion of this is the infrastructure piece. It is intended for water, sewer, and broadband alone. There are counties that have asked about doing road projects utilizing these funds. That's not a possibility under this unless you have the lost revenues component. For us, I don't know what that's going to look like. We do have a GFOA calculator that came out that helps us estimate or calculate what that revenue source is going to be. Right now, based on what we have for budget, it looks like we would have some lost revenues in 2021, but we have local option sales tax outperforming. We only have about $1 million capacity based on the GFOA calculator right now. It is very possible with how we're performing that that won't come to fruition. that will outpace that counterfactual revenue. Their calculator shows that we have about 4.8% growth in revenue year over year. So if our revenue doesn't hit that, we'll have some. But until 2021 is closed, it will be hard to know because it's supposed to be based off our actuals.
Okay, it always concerns me when they say that, and you reiterated that it's broad, because then it tends to get funneled down to get more specific, and as they reconsider their position on how those dollars are spent, and that's always a concern of mine, and I think that we should watch that real close on what's going to qualify.
Yep, and we're constantly following the updates to the facts that Treasury's putting out. We're following what NACO, the National Association of Counties, puts out, what the Government Financial Officers Association is putting out. We do monthly, we have a MICA financial directors meeting, and every one of those pretty much has been dedicated to us discussing what the other counties are doing with the funds, where they're seeing the opportunities, and a lot of us are in the exact same boat of the guidance is broad and ever-changing. What do you do with the funds at this point? A lot have been trying to figure out that lost revenue component because that is the most flexible dollars that we have available to us. But we're all in the same boat of we don't know if that's going to come to fruition or not.
Have you picked a county that should be the leader so that they're sort of the one that gets caught and then we can adjust? Just asking the question.
There are a couple counties that have been taking the lead trying to find some things out, and it's been helpful for us because they jump on some of these bandwagons and try and get them done early. But I think this will be another one of those, just like the CARES, where we're adapting over the coming months to what Treasury changes and what reporting requirements change, and it'll be an interesting process in the beginning.
Yep. Okay.
You know, Nick, we've also been talking a lot about broadband, you know, and now's probably the time to start either, you know, trying to identify where our holes are that we aren't getting coverage, and maybe, you know, start meeting with the vendors so that we can, you know, have them tell us where they're, you know, we don't have coverage. So there's, you know, identifying that.
Yep, and I know that Tim is working on that aspect of it, of
Okay.
trying to meet and get some guidance on how to do a broadband project throughout the county and make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck when we do that.
And Bill, that's so hard because even though an area says it's covered, doesn't mean they actually have internet.
Right.
So I really hope that they'll honestly report.
Well, the federal government likes to call it census blocking. I call it service blocking is what I call it, but that's my personal viewpoint.
So I think there is some discussion that's been going on with all of the providers in the area, because that's what we're going to need to have, is not just one or two telling us where their service area is. We need to have all of the providers that would cover Crow Wing County need to be involved in that conversation. And those conversations have started so that we can start to identify some of those areas. And also with those communities that are underserved or need to have some additional coverage, if you will, there's been some conversations about potentially partnering with some of our municipal partners in that realm as well. Cities and townships will also get ARPA funds. We've seen a draft of potentially what that could be. They don't have their money yet, I don't believe. And we're not really sure exactly what that final dollar amount would be, but there's been some conversations that Tim has had with those cities and townships as well. So that whole process, even though one of the things that is actually great about this round of funding is the fact that we do have a little bit of time to be planful in how we set this out, but we don't want to wait. So we need to kind of move forward with starting what that plan is going to be so that we can earmark which dollars need to be utilized when, and that will help with the investment aspect side of things as well. So if we are able to recoup the interest on these dollars, let's make sure we know when we're going to need to spend them, so we invest them the right way so that we can recoup as much interest as possible.
Yeah, before you go, so townships, I mean, they don't really, the only thing they're really doing is maintaining the roads. That's pretty much all the job they have. So makes no sense for them to really get money. So if they can't use it on the roads, what could they use it for township-wise? Is there anything that we could think outside of the box that, or inside the box that would work for them, so I could go out and suggest to them, rather than them just saying, here you go, Crow Wing County, and turn it back over
Yeah.
to us? Is there anything that they could do to enhance, like maybe their town hall, and try to get some Wi-Fi service there, or?
So that is definitely something that they could look at, is making sure, and that's part of that partnering that we've talked about, particularly with Wi-Fi or broadband, is what services do they need at their local township? I know a couple of them during the CARES funding were able to put Wi-Fi hotspots or certain things at their town halls so that the community could use that as well
Right.
for remote work or distance learning or whatever the case may be. So that is an option that they can look at. As the guidance gets more clear, we're going to have a better way of saying to these townships, here are some things that potentially you could utilize those funds for. So while maybe it's not going to be able to pay for road projects, there is some language in that bill that says it can be used for infrastructure projects. So if there is something that they need to do within their community that they haven't been able to levy for, or they haven't been able to get done, there might be some funding assistance with some of that as well.
Are we gonna come up with kind of some ideas for them,
We're probably not going to tell the townships what they should do, but we will probably give them, you know, some list of, here are some possible things you could think of.
I'd like to have some kind of idea, so that if I do visit with them, I can say, you know, here's some potential things. Otherwise, I just think they're just gonna say, you know what, here, Crow Wing County,
Yeah.
you take the money, because they're not gonna even know what to do.
And townships, you know, they're not going to get huge dollars. They're not going to be getting $12 million that they have to do. I believe it's based on a population per capita amount for those townships as well. So we will have some type of guidance that we can give them that helps them to identify what they could utilize those funds for.
But I mean, even if they get $10,000 or $20,000,
Right.
that's still a lot of money
Right.
in some of these.
At the township
townships.
level. Yeah.
One of the things to keep in mind with the townships and the cities is, for the county in this round, we're working directly with the Fed. So we're out of the mix of the state portion. The cities, townships, and other local municipalities are getting it direct from the state. So they aren't able to actually turn it over to us in this round. They have to turn it back to the state. They also have to request the funds from the state in order for them to actually come. If they do not request them, the state actually has to turn those funds back to the treasury. If they request them and don't use them, they're able to return them to the state for the state to use. So it's different than the CARES.
Can we get, when we know what the exact amount is for like St. Matthias and Daggett Brook and Long Lake, and can I get that list so that if we do figure out some ideas, I can go and say, hey, you can get $25,000, you know, and you can do this. So, because I think there are just some townships that I think could use a little push.
Absolutely. And the state has a timeline that they had to get the funds out. They did ask for an extension from Treasury. They were allowed up to 60 days. They asked for the full 60 days. I believe they actually got that. So it will be another month or two before the cities and townships really get any guidance from the state on what funds they're going to get or how to request those funds. But we'll keep our eyes on it because we have the unorganized districts, and that's 2 townships that we should be seeing funding for. So we'll have to do that same process for those 2 through the state.
Okay. And then, can I ask another question? So, if they request that money and they want to try to help with some Wi-Fi or some fiber, can they get the money and then can they either give it to us or give it to CTC or I mean?
That's that partnership thing that we're talking about. We'll probably have to have some type of an agreement because of the fact that they don't work through the counties in this round of funding, like we did with the CARES funding, where they could just turn it over to the county and the county would spend it. We'll probably have to work on an agreement of some kind that would say the township X is is contributing X number of dollars towards this broadband project that is being coordinated through Crow Wing County. So it would probably be an agreement between the service provider, the county, and the township.
And I would also say that I have never been, just like on Tuesday with that grant, just because there's a grant, that doesn't mean we always have to run after it and take it. It's just like this here. If we're saying, oh, well, if we don't take it, it's going to go back. I don't know, I have mixed emotions about, yes, taking it or let it go back. I mean, it's the same thing with the airport. We're scrambling, trying to figure out how to spend that money that was given to us, but I don't know, it's not always, I don't know that it's always a good thing to get a grant. It reminds me, I was telling somebody the other day after that meeting on Tuesday that I remember when President Clinton was in office and he wanted 100,000 new cops. Well, that was great. There was a grant, I think it was for like 2 or 3 years, and I think Brainerd took advantage of that, but then the grant money was gone, and they had already hired those 3. The money was there for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden, boom, had to go up their levy because they had to cover the cost that was paying for those cops. So, I mean, it's it's the carrot and a stick mentality. You dangle that carrot, and they go, oh, great. And then the program is in place, but the funding doesn't follow it later on, so.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The county engineer has a question. His hand is raised.
Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and Nick. I just had a clarifying question. When you were talking about lost revenue, I wondered if there's 2 different definitions. One is the local option sales tax revenue, and you alluded to your colleagues talking about how that somehow played into whether this money could be used on the county road system. But then there's also a lost revenue. I like to call it reduced revenue from state aid that not only the counties are subject to, but also these townships. So just focusing on the township discussion right now, each township, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Each township is subject to reduced state aid allotment for their roadway system. And so I was a little confused by some of their money that they're allocated would not be able to use on roads because they will have reduced revenue because of COVID coming from state aid. And I just wondered if you could clarify that, or am I missing something?
The loss in revenue or the reduction in revenue is something that is fairly broad in what we can use that for. Once we claim a loss in revenue, then we're able to utilize those funds for roadway projects or anything else that we deem fit, at least based on current guidance. So that would apply to the townships and the cities as well. The challenge is you can't look at the individual line items. By guidance, we have to look at the organization as a whole. So we may have lost state aid revenue, but if we gained revenue in other areas, including levy, including local option sales tax, including state grants, that offsets that loss, and we ultimately end up with nothing. No lost revenue, I should say. So the townships may see it in one aspect, but they may see growth in another, and if those balance out, then they won't have that loss in revenue, and they won't be able to utilize those funds for roadways.
So it's possible then for a township to show loss or reduced revenues based on this, but the county might not.
Right.
That's what you're saying, so.
Yep. Because we're looking at just our organization's revenues alone. And it's as an aggregate. I know originally there was conversation that we're losing state aid money. Can we recover the state aid money? Based on guidance, we have to look at every dollar combined as a whole. We can't individually look at areas. Otherwise, we would look at the jail as a good example of we lost the state revenue for the inmates, well, we would like to replace that revenue, but if we're gaining revenues in other areas and we're outpacing that growth rate, we won't be able to recover that.
Do grants count against the revenue?
Everything besides federal grants count against our revenue right now. We have about 85 million in 2019, and 79 million of that revenue actually counted for this calculation. Majority of that's the federal grants that we've received in 2019.
Okay. Even though it's a gift.
Yep. And it fluctuates up and down based on, what's going on in highway. We see ups and downs within our state aid funding there. And those ups and downs play. That's why they had us look at 16, 17, 18, and 19 for our counterfactual base to get a decent calculation, because they know there's some fluctuation in that.
And I was differentiating in my mind the difference between earned revenue, selling, your widget, versus a grant. So to me, there's two different definitions of revenue.
Agreed, but I think there's areas that are very grant heavy and grant dependent, and that allows them to use that if they saw a reduction in grants because of COVID, because those funds got redirected somewhere else. It allows them to still capture that going forward. So there's positives and negatives to taking grants into effect.
Okay. Anything else, Tim? Because your hand is still up.
Thanks, Nick, that clarifies. But I think it clarifies the county and how the reduction in state aid would not be eligible for this grant. But I think it also clarified that maybe that there is an opportunity for townships, which of course probably are not able to generate more revenue and can continue to show a loss overall of all their funds. So back to Paul Corn, or Commissioner Corning's point, is that there may be an opportunity, it sounds like, for some of the more remote townships to use this for road funding.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on ARPA?
Questions? Nope. I think we can move forward.
All right. Now I can steal the screen and put my presentation up. Sorry. With budget cycle starting, we do have staff actually starting to enter budget into the Munis system so that we're able to get prepared for our July meeting, where we'll bring that first blush of the budget to you. Then we will go back and work it out to bring it back to you again in August for the in-depth dive into the budget as a whole. To start some of this off, we're going to talk a little bit about fund balances. We did discuss this back in the early part of the year, but wanted to touch base on it again just to give you an idea of where we're at in each one of the individual funds and what it's going to take us to get those fund balances back to that baseline minimum. We'll start with this graph. We did look at this in the beginning of the year. It shows the history of the fund balances. You'll notice that the darkest one that dips below the red there, that is our community services department. That is an area that we have seen some challenges. Our fund balance did go negative. It did move back up in 2020. We're still well below our minimum requirement. Just as a reminder, for community services, that's 20 to 30% of the next year's expenses is where we're supposed to be at. We are currently sitting at 5% for community services at the end of 2020. So there's a long ways to go. We do have for them calculated $800,000 in fund balance growth within the budget. We've had that for the last couple of years. At this point, that is anticipated to continue going forward. If we continue doing that and we don't see any use or growth of fund balance outside of this $800,000, it'll take us 6 years to get to the minimum based on the current expenses we have. That will extend out because, as with everything else, inflation drives our expenses up. We will probably see that go out to a 7 or 8 year time frame for us to actually catch up. Next one that's at the bottom there is capital projects. Capital projects, we did have the planned usage where we did not levy. We utilized the funds to deliver the program to help us maintain a appropriate levy percentage increase. We did bring the levy back, and in 2020, we were over our minimum. For this one, we have established a $2.2 million minimum fund balance that was set by board. We're at 2.58 million at the end of 2020. At the rate we're going, I believe that we will maintain that one fairly well. The green one is our debt service. That is a planned usage. Since we did make that final payment, we do not need to carry a significant fund balance in there to make those payments. So that drew it down to the baseline that we need to deliver on the airport bond at this point. That will eventually, once we become debt-free, be a zero and eliminated from this chart. The yellow is highway. Highway has seen some significant benefits from local option sales tax that allows them to grow their fund balance. That growth is planful because it allows them to have the funds available for major projects like the upcoming 115 project. So we do anticipate that will be drawn back down based on those projects. And as we see the outperformance, we'll probably see that continue to grow a little bit. So it may be something to look at in the future once these major projects are done. What is that long-term plan to maintain that fund balance appropriately? They're currently sitting at 30%. Board did establish a different minimum than what the Office of State Auditor requires. We did move that one to 12 to 20% because we do have an outside revenue source. We didn't feel there was a need for that significant fund balance to be in place to get us through our low point of June. So we did move that to 12 to 20, but they are currently sitting at 30. But if you take out the restricted portion, which is the local option sales tax, that does get us down to about 13, 14%. So we're within reason there. The gray is our general fund. Our general fund is fairly close. The Office of State Auditor recommends 35 to 50% for our minimum fund balance. We are currently sitting at 31%. This is another area that we are investing $200,000 instead of $800,000 into fund balance growth year over year. Right now, at the current rate, it's going to take us 6 years in that fund as well to get back to that minimum based on current expenses. I do anticipate, again, just like community services, inflation will drive some growth in that budget, that it may extend that out to 7 or 8 years before we get back to that minimum. We are fairly close, but you do see in our available cash flows that both of these funds start to go negative at this point in time. General fund is about $200,000 negative in available cash, and community services is a little over $2 million negative in available cash at this point in time. It looks bad when we have negative available cash, but there is plenty of funds in the bank. There's plenty of funds available to us. It's restricted and committed funds that help us float through these periods until we get that July settlement for levy dollars. Kind of a little bit of a colored graph to help see where we're short. In the general fund, at the end of 2020, we had $13.388 million in the fund. Of that, just over $3 million was restricted or committed. This is our offset for OPEB. This is our restricted and committed funds for land-based recorder fees and other funds that have a very specific use that we can't just use them for whatever purpose. They get restricted and committed, and they come off of that $13 million to give us an available of $11.43 million. Our minimum at the end of 2020 was slightly higher than that. So we have $1.185 million that we were short at the end of 2020 in order to get us to that minimum point. Highway fund, we can see that one is very healthy. We have $4.1 million available to us after restricting and committing the local option sales tax. So we're in a good position there.
Just hit your enter button first. Enter button way over there.
No.
And then down here.
Okay.
All right. Community services, we can see that we were at $1.421 million in fund balance at the end of 2020. We should have been at $6.1 million. That gives us an available of a negative $4.73 million. So this is where we're investing that 800,000 to try and bring that back up so we hit our minimums. So we stop the unrestricted cash balances being below zero. So we're funding everything with the funds intended for that department. And CIP, we were in a good position there. Any questions on fund balance or how we get to that target, timeframes? All right. New thing to the budget for this month. I understood that there's interest and need for more information related to an individual department and how they are functioning financially. So I met with our business manager group and we discussed options of how do we bring more data to you related to each individual department. And we worked together to develop a rough draft of them actually coming before you and giving kind of a financial update on their individual department so that you get a better picture of what's going on in each department. Dan has gracefully been our sacrificial lamb to come up first with this. So keep in mind that this is a rough draft. This is our first blush at this. If there's anything that you want to know more about, please feel free to ask Dan. If there's anything in here when we're done with this that you go, I'd like to see more information on this, or when this department comes up, I'd like to see more on something else, please let me know and I'll work with the business managers to make sure we get you everything we can get for their department.
Okay, thank you. Morning, Dan.
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you doing?
Good.
So, our first slide here will be what our revenues are at currently for the Sheriff's Office with the month-to-date budgeting. As you can see, we have the blue line is actually what was budgeted, and then the orange is what we actually have for actuals. Comparing to April to May, you can see there is quite a big gap in between what was actually budgeted to what we actually drew in for revenues during May. The two big drivers there's actually two reasons why there's such a gap in between the April and May discrepancy there. And those two drivers are, one, the emergency management grant we had budgeted to receive in May, and so far we have not received that. We actually submitted for reimbursement on 5/19, and we haven't seen that back yet. Normally, you can see it week, 2 weeks, but it can take up to a month or so, all depending on
How much is that, Dan?
That is $39,900. So that's 40,000 of that gap there. And then the other piece of it, why there is such a big gap is normally we bill out, well, we do bill out for record management system fees for our law enforcement software to the municipalities that use that as well too. And we usually bill it out right around in the May timeframe. Actually, I sent it out on June 1st this year, so that was $55,355. So between the two of them, it's about just $96,000 there that we're looking at just for a discrepancy for in between May and June there.
But in the whole scheme of things, I mean, yeah, I think your budget is around 12 million.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And both of those will catch up in June here. I anticipate we'll be receiving both of those in June, so.
yeah, I
So
don't
it's
think-
just a timing issue
Yeah,
as far as that goes.
I'm not sweating it.
Yeah, yeah. And other little discrepancies as well too. So the service fees were still down approximately $27,000 due to just slower in the court. So that actually reduces our paper service fees as well too.
Dan, what about, has there been an uptick in people that are applying for a concealed carry permit? Have you
Yes,
noticed
yeah,
that?
yep, definitely. That's been a huge, especially the January and February piece of it. We are looking at, I think, right now, we're over budget about $40,000 from what we had anticipated through May. So that definitely is a,
People are just kind of arming up or what? Or
yeah, it's amazing. It's a hard one to budget for because you have, when you actually apply and receive the permit, it's a 5-year,
Right.
it's for 5 years, and it's hard to know if they're going to reapply or not as well too. So that one's always a hard one to
So
stick,
40
and
yeah,
people.
So how much is it? Is it $100 or how much is it?
It's $75 for a new permit and then $60 for a renewal. And $10 goes to the state for the new, $5 goes to the state for the renewal.
So 40,000 up, that would be from what you
It's-
thought, so that's.
It's quite significant, yeah. January and February, I think, were our biggest 2 months that we've ever had as far as bringing in permits.
Okay.
Those were our, as far back as, I think, we went back to, I think 2017 was, or 2018, right in that time frame, were the last biggest ones that we had, so.
Okay.
So that actually is bringing our revenues up a little bit as well too, so that's a good thing. Other drivers that, of the discrepancy between the actual and budgeted, again, I think I mentioned last month, the Bomb Squad grant. We did receive an invoice, and we paid an invoice here just the beginning of June for a $50,000 piece of equipment that we had budgeted for previously. But it was a timing issue due to the fact that normally the grants are normally fully executed by 12/31 of the year, and this year we didn't even get the information to us until March. So then the grants weren't even fully executed until, I think, middle of April. So until that point, we can't actually purchase any equipment until we have that fully executed grant. So we had budgeted for some pieces of equipment that, and of course, I think I mentioned last month as well too, everything is on back order. So we have 2 other purchase orders out there as well too that will be coming up. So timing issue with that grant is something that it'll all even out at the end of the year, but with this monthly budgeting, you'll see some fluctuation as well there too. So, and with that said, we actually get reimbursed with those grants on a quarterly basis. We apply for a reimbursement there. So, I think that's it for as far as the overall revenue piece of it, for all the discrepancies there. As far as expenses go, we're pretty much staying even keel here with budgeted to actuals. The biggest driver where we're actually beating budget here is the personnel services. We're under budget by just shy of $610,000. Obviously, that's due to vacant positions that we haven't filled, or throughout the year that terminations, resignations, retirements that have really set us back as far as being under budget there.
So quick question for you, Dan.
Yep.
On the expense side.
Yep.
If everything had been similar to prior to the pandemic,
Yes.
COVID, would this be a whole different picture then? Because your staffing would have, and let's assume your staffing was full, that would be up. The expenses related to the jail would be up.
Yeah, actually, the expenses related to the jail, that I think is a big driver. The pandemic is a driver there. I think as far as the personnel services, I think, one, it's everybody and all law enforcement agencies across the state, across the nation, I think are having a real tough time recruiting people.
Right.
Not because of the pandemic, but because of other issues that, have come to fruition there, so.
So my concern though is that assuming all things would have been normal,
Yep,
your budget for expenses, so the blue column would have had to, did you take into account some of those reductions that you were seeing from 2020 when you were doing because we would have been putting that budget together mid-2020, and you wouldn't have known how long the COVID situation was going to take place. You wouldn't know about the hiring.
correct.
So you would make the assumption, I would assume on the expense side, that those expenses were going to be incurred.
Correct, yes. Yep, yeah,
Perhaps they're already accounted for in that blue column, I'm not sure.
as far as
Let's say
taking
you're-
into effect the pandemic, you're saying?
Where we knew we were going to lose the money on the DOC side.
Yep.
I mean, I think that was
Correct.
a given, we understood that.
Yep,
But not being able to fill positions, and then we wouldn't have been able to predict accurately the reduction in other expenses related to the inmates that are in the jail. So was that accounted for, or was that thought about when you put your budget together
when we
last
put our
year?
budget together, we were looking at trends for the previous years, thinking we didn't know mid-2020, when we were actually sitting down going through the budget, how long it was going to last. So we looked at what the trends were previous to the pandemic.
Yep.
And went with those numbers.
Okay,
So that's why the
that-
discrepancy there. Looking at 2022, the question mark is still out there. Are we going to see an uptick in inmates or not? That's the big question, and that's the hardest thing to budget for.
So my thought then is that the blue column for 2021
21?
that we're seeing up there did include, because you were looking at trends.
Yep.
But it wasn't, in terms of the impact of COVID and the difficulty in hiring positions,
Yep.
wasn't fully known at that point, so you were assuming that there was going to be, so that was what I
Yes.
was trying to get at.
Yep,
is
yep,
that-
definitely, yeah. We, as far as the expenses go, we anticipated the pandemic being over with and being back to normal.
So now this year, like you are indicating, it's going to be more difficult because we don't know,
Those trends are,
trends
yeah,
are skewed at this point.
yes, correct, yeah, that's
Thank you.
gonna be the hardest part of it all, so.
Okay.
Dan, with the reduction in personnel that you have, how has that affected service?
Right now, I think we're keeping up with all the calls and everything. I think with anything, when you're understaffed, I think it's probably more or less the burnout rate, so to speak, that I would be concerned with personally. I don't deal with, the hiring and the personnel side of things, but I think that's the key thing that they're keeping an eye on and trying to provide the most service without, actually burning somebody out as well, going on that note as well too. So I think they've been doing a good job as far as the overtime. Our overtime budget is still under budget. So that's, I think, a key indicator that the managing of that personnel on that side they're doing a good job on that, so.
Dan mentioned earlier about the civil processing fees. I think we're putting out less documents where we have to go serve, so that helps offset some of that reduction too. So they're able to focus more on the patrol side of things than going out and serving documents, which we see that reduction in revenue because we're not out doing that work at this point. But that's partially because of the courts as well being behind in their process as well.
Very good point. Thanks, Nick. Other items, just minor issues as well, or minor discrepancies as well too. The supplies and materials, were under budget about $25,000. There again, that's due to
Right.
a lot of it's due to the jails and the reduction over there as well too, so. Looking forward to our financial outlook, kind of looking to the months ahead. As far as personnel expenses, we'll see additional savings there as well too, just due to the fact that it's a work in progress. We're getting some new hires in, but then as well, we're having there's a couple more retirees, coming up. So it's kind of a moving target there, but I know they're doing some more testing for the full-time patrol deputies here coming up. So cross your fingers that there's some good candidates there as well too. So jail revenues, currently we're seeing a little uptick as far as out of county holds. I know they have their feelers, their eyes and ears out there just to see if there's anybody looking to house inmates out. And I think as of today, we actually had 20 out-of-county holds that we have currently. We budgeted for 10, so that's definitely a good uptick that way. And, we're hoping to at least meet the budget as far as the revenues go for out-of-county holds and DOC. Well, we don't have any DOC budgeted, but currently we do have one through September. Heath said that we have a definite there, but that one's kind of hit and miss there too. I think we had 3 at the beginning of the month, then it went down to 0, now we're at 1. So we're still getting some revenue in there, but hopefully we're gonna meet or at least beat it as well too this year with that. Courts, post-pandemic restrictions. It sounds like they're starting to open up a little more. They're not going to open up the faucet full bore. I think they're going to let it trickle in. And so what that means for us, obviously jail expenses will go up as we get more people through the courts. We're going to probably see more people getting incarcerated in the courts as well too, or in the jail. And then, as well as that's on the other side of things, flip side of things, civil service fees, we'll probably see an uptick in paper services for those as well too. So we'll be bringing in more revenue at that point, so. Lastly, just a kind of end on a good note to our community support. We continue to see a really strong support countywide to our officers and our deputies and the whole office as a whole. Even through these tough times that we've been through as a law enforcement, as the nation has seen some scrutiny on that side of things. Just for an example, we received just recently a donation for $2,500 from a local business. You guys will probably see that coming through with the next board agenda there too. But that was just an example of how individuals out there are looking at us as well too and supporting us. So, and they wanted that to go to the drone team, which obviously supports everybody throughout the county that way. Other support items as well too. We've seen everything from drawings to letters to goodie bags for the deputies, but it's been a real pleasure to see that there's definitely a lot of community support throughout, as well as you guys too. I know you guys have backed the sheriff and his department, so we appreciate it.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I think that in our county, law enforcement in general is well supported and appreciated. And I think that all these agencies, but particularly the Sheriff's Department, does a really good job of what they're charged with doing in a difficult situation. So, I mean, I take my hat off to them every day. It's a thankless job. They don't get probably paid enough for the risk they take, although there are limits, so I better throw that in there. But, you know, it's a tough job. And, you know, on one hand, you're arresting somebody, and on the other hand, you're trying to mitigate situations. So it's a tough position for those officers to be in, and I think they do a great job. So
Yeah,
and
I agree.
It's nice to hear that the community recognizes that as a whole too. So
Definitely, yeah. And yeah, from the deputies down to the corrections officers to the dispatchers, it's some of those jobs that I'm thankful that we have people that can fit into those positions, so.
yep. And I do appreciate you bringing up the burning out of officers and that. So that's a high priority that we try to get those positions filled so we don't get to that position, because it's a tough enough job when everything is running smoothly and when they're picking up extra hours, even though the overtime budget seems to be under budget, that doesn't mean the individual isn't experiencing that burnout feeling. So
Correct.
dollars don't always cover the emotional impact, so appreciate you focusing on that. And I've seen on the personnel report too that there's some hires that you're making offers to them.
Yes.
Patrol officers and that, so.
Yep. It's, like I said, it's a work in progress. Obviously, the sooner the better, but the pool out there isn't as big as it once was, so.
Well, it's the best county in the state. I'll say that at any county meeting I go to, so.
Yep, I agree.
It's a great place to come and work if they want a good job and a good community area to work with. So, thank you very much.
You bet. Any questions from you guys?
Thank you, Dan.
You bet. Thank you.
You don't have any questions, Paul?
No, I don't.
Gee. Okay.
So like I said, that's our first blush at this. If there's anything that you want further from Dan, please let me or him know, and we can get more information for you. If there's anything in particular that you want to hear from other departments, we will have land services, we'll have community services and highway through here. We'll also have Corey from my office come up and represent the admin services, the attorney's office, governance services as a whole as their business manager, to kind of do the same thing for those areas as well in the future months.
Okay.
Next month, I don't believe, I might have Jessica on the schedule for next month, depending on how budget looks. Then we'll skip August because we're going to focus on budget, and then we'll come back in September and October probably with the other two, and then Corey will fit in there at some point in time too.
Good, and I appreciate you bringing the business managers in and having them present to us. I think that's good for them, good for us to hear directly from them. They're, you know, out in the battlegrounds. Not that you aren't, Nick, or your department isn't, but, you know.
They're dealing with their department every single day, and we're just seeing the top end of that, so.
Absolutely, so, again, thank you, Dan, and I think that's a good approach to informing us of what's going on the budget area, so thank you.
Okay, then back. Now, Teresa's favorite part. We'll jump into our countywide financial status update. Starting off with general fund, we continue to see revenues outpace what we have budgeted. That is still related to the timing of settlement for items that were entered into the IAS world, not being entered in time to hit December of last year and rolling over to this year, and that's the theme throughout many of these when we talk about the tax side, being settled out differently than it normally has been. We also see the revenues in some of the other departments driving some of the growth, but then other areas pulling that down. On the expense side, we are performing fairly close to budget here. We're off by $1 million as a whole to the good. A lot of that is driven by Sheriff's Office with the personnel services side. This is just a repeat of Sheriff's Office. Dan went through this fairly well in very good detail above what I had written out for you, so I think we're covered on this one. Expense side, we see that reduction, that is that personnel services side as the primary driver. There's a few other areas we're saving throughout, but personnel is our primary driver there. Looking at land services, revenues were at 137% of budget. Permits and recorder's fees continue to outpace what we anticipated at this point. Our charges for services were over by $70,601 so far this year. That's recorder's fees being collected. We're still seeing a lot of documents come through that side, driving revenue growth there. And our permits continue to outpace what we anticipated. On the expense side, they are trending right on with where they should be. We're at 98.3%. Personnel services is the primary driver behind that. There is some services and charges that have increased though in this area, and that's related to enforcement action. For governance services, this includes the board, the attorney's office, and admin services, or not admin services, but admin itself. Revenues were at 138% of budget. The attorney's office, their charges for services continue to outperform. So they are still seeing a significant number of cases come through that they're able to charge for and see revenue growth there. On the expense side, we are at 98.94%. We are trending right on with where we should be. You do see a little bit of a bump in January where we're well below budget, and in February we're well above budget. That is timing of expenses. Administrative services, our revenue is 112% of budget. The primary driver here is on sale liquor license fees. They were above budget. The budget is split over 12 months, and we normally collect this in May and June. So you see this bump here, but that'll level out by the end of the year. This is one of those line items that we're gonna have to look at to try and get this lined up with the actual history that we have, so it's not spread over those 12 months, so it makes this picture a little more realistic. On the expense side, we are at 98.94% of budget. A lot of what's going on here is a little bit of savings in personnel and then just normal timing issues. We do anticipate this will be fairly close to on budget by year end. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong line there. Expenses were at 93.15%. Supplies and materials are below what we anticipated through May. The primary driver there is our maintenance supplies. We're also seeing our charges and service below expected. Electricity and water expense, we still have less staff in the buildings, so our electricity use and our water usage is still down. I anticipate as people start coming back, that will start getting back into line with what we have, but it will most likely tail out to the end of the year with some savings for us. Jumping into highway, highway is at 130.48%. Highway always has that timing challenge with when do revenues come in from state aid, when are requests sent out versus when are expenses paid. So state aid revenue is above budget through this point in time of the year. It's just the timing aspect of that. We do see that the federal grants were well below budget. We actually didn't gather any of that funding yet. That is, again, due to timing of when that is submitted to the Fed and when funds are actually sent. That is one of the areas where we're not able to advance the money. The state aid side, we can request a portion of the funds in advance. Fed, we can only get as we do the project. Local option sales tax continues to outperform. We're $470,000 over what we anticipated for budget. Looking at last year to this year, we're a little over $500,000 ahead of last year at this point, based on our actual collection rate. So we continue to see that just climb and climb and climb. We're unique in, we went through the whole pandemic with minimal impact to local option sales tax. So sales continue to climb throughout last year. They're continuing to climb this year. Being Minnesota's favorite place definitely pays off for us in that aspect.
Well, let's hope that beanstalk just keeps growing and growing and never stops.
We did see in the past with like Brainerd and Baxter, when they implemented this and we went through the Great Recession, we did see theirs tail off. I think the difference between them and us is we get to capture the county as a whole. They're so focused in on their little region that if there is a slowdown, it's more significant to them. For us, we get the advantage of having the resorts that in the recession and throughout the pandemic, it seems people have been coming here because they can't fly or do whatever they want to do. They're coming here, and we're seeing that continue to grow for us as a county. Expense side, they're at 79.21% of budget. Again, timing is the primary driver behind this. On contract payments, we are $769,000 behind where we anticipate at this point in time. As they deliver projects, that will start to come back within the budgeted expectations. Supplies and materials were also under $232,000 due to the lack of snow in the early part of this year. Our salt usage was down, our fuel usage was down. Our repair and maintenance supply expenses are below expected budget at this point, so we do see some savings on that side. As long as we don't get nasty winds, we should be okay. From personnel side, they do have some staff vacancies that they've had going on throughout this year that's saved us $101,000 so far this year. They are filling those roles as far as I know, so we should see that this stays under budget, but it should come back in line on the monthly basis. Roll the next one. Community services, revenue side, we are at 107.67% of budget. Property taxes in the beginning of the year are still a good portion of that, as well as our charges for services were higher through May. Their mental health targeted case management program is actually pulling in more dollars than anticipated at this point, and that's helping us see increased revenues here. On the expense side, we are at 91.3%. We're always happy when expenses are below budget, but we do see in this one that public aid assistance is under budget by $892,000 and some odd change. Foster home placement and corrections placement continue to be well below what we've anticipated through this point. So if this trend continues, that'll be a very good thing. We did see significant fund balance growth last year because we did see reduced expenses in this particular area. If this continues, we should be able to see some significant fund balance growth, which will help us chip away at that 6-year time frame. It'll boost us a little bit there. So fingers crossed it continues this way, that we see revenues outpacing and expenses well under. Personnel services are also under budget here by $150,000. Retirements shifting, everything else going on helps us keep that expense a little bit lower. Any questions on their revenues or expenses throughout?
Whatever strategies have been implemented for out-of-home placement have been pretty effective. I'll knock on wood, because that can change in a flash, but I want to recognize them for the great efforts in that particular area, and what they're doing is great. I'll have to say the families out there must be doing a better job too. I've got to give them a little credit and working harder to make their lives successful. So let's just hope that it holds. It's a volatile one that can raise its ugly head up real quick and cost us a lot of money. So appreciate it.
Absolutely agree. We have seen in the past that 1 or 2 placements can drive that way above what budget is pretty quickly. Unrestricted cash flows, we continue to be well above where we've been for the last couple months. We do anticipate that unrestricted cash will be above zero in June. We had 2 years where that did fall below zero. Just keep in mind that a lot of this has to do with our strategy of not investing funds. By not putting them in and tying them up, they are available cash for us to utilize, so it makes this picture look better. We have a little over $4 million that we don't have invested, and we have about $5 million that is currently invested. We talked a little bit earlier about our interest rates and investment income. We will see that be well below what we anticipated. Last month, our average balance in the bank account was $53 million. We collected all the taxes for all the communities, so that gets put into our bank account, and we earn our interest off that. With an average balance of $53 million, we collected just over $2,000 in interest. That put us at a 0.0046% interest rate on our money market savings account. You could almost put it under your mattress and be just as good. We are working with Bremer to try and look at what our options are to try and move that money around a little bit and get some better return somewhere else. We have a $4.3 million CD that just matured. We just put that back in for 12 months at 0.24%. So it's locked up for 12 months at 0.24. If we wanted to get more return, we could have put it in for 24 at 0.3. So we would have gotten 0.06% interest to tie it up for another 12 months. So rates are unbelievably low, and they continue to work on our money market savings account to find the best ways for us to get better returns. It's a challenge. We're restricted on where funds can be invested. We're restricted on how they can be utilized. So it makes it harder for them, but we're working as close as we can to try and improve that.
I think before you go on, I think that we should thank the accounting department and all the departments for their efforts in the last year. I also think that COVID has been a blessing on one side and a terrible experience on the other side, but when it comes to the CARES Act dollars coming to us, that's helped us somewhat with some of these budgets and some of the expense reductions that have taken place because our staff aren't in-house in a lot of cases. So we're not doing some of the regular maintenance, or like you mentioned, the water costs and maybe some of the electrical costs and that are down. But I think that when we looked at where we were at in 2019 with our cash flow and where we're at now, we're doing a nice job. The strategy was well placed and carried out by everyone to ensure that we were getting back to where we were pretty safe when it came to cash flow, and we're working hard to get to a better position there, but certainly this is a tremendous improvement over last year, when I can't tell you how concerned I was, and I think the other board members too, that we were going to be able to get through until the tax collections and that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We've worked very hard to try and get us into a better position. So, we always focus in on our levy portions of our own internals, but we always kind of skip over our first and second assessment districts. They are an area that we have to budget. It's an area that we have to manage as well. So we felt it was appropriate to bring them into the picture too when we do our financial status update. So beginning this month, this will be in here as well, just for us to touch base on how first assessment and second assessment district are doing. For the first assessment district, we are at 446.14% of budget. It's a big number, but when you look at, we budgeted $17,499 and we collected $78,000 in revenue, it makes that percent look very impressive. Property taxes, same thing here. We did see that come in January, just like we do in our internal. They're getting settled out in January as well. We also saw that the state gas tax, we budget that over 12 months. First assessment and second assessment district are an area that we don't particularly focus in on the monthly budget. We just take and we spread it over 12 months. We will most likely next year start trying to put this into a 12-month cycle, now that we'll be bringing this before you every month, to get a better picture for you of how this looks. But that does come in March, but it's spread over the entire time frame. So that's why we see that big bump in March. On the expense side, for first and second assessment district, there are 3 different areas that we budget for. One is admin fees. So our time and our efforts that we put into managing these funds get costed back to the first and second assessment district. And that is updated every year in the budget. We take that amount out of their funds. We also pay for fire service contract from their areas. First Assessment District pays the city of Brainerd for their fire coverage. And then the second assessment is covered by Aiken County, or Aiken City Fire. Those are 3 primary areas that we are budgeting for. On First Assessment District, we're at 91.3%. Contractor and maintenance fees were under budget by $271,000, primarily due to timing of the projects, but we did also see that reduction in the first part of the year due to lack of need to send home vig out to plow the roads. We're also seeing that the grading contract is delayed a little bit for us to get out there and grade. So this should pan out towards the end of the year, but we do anticipate that snow doesn't impact us heavily in the fall, that we will see savings here. Second assessment district, again, well above budget. Exact same things play in here. That settlement in January, based on the timing of reconciling of funds over in land services at the end of last year, makes January look significant. We also have the state gas tax spread over 12 months in this one as well. You see that in March. On the expense side, we are at 91.4%. Same thing is going on in second assessment as in first assessment. Due to the lack of need for plowing, we see some savings here. That's the primary driver for second assessment.
Nick, does the second assessment have a fire service expense
Yes.
also?
Yep. They see the exact same 3 buckets that first assessment sees. They have an admin fee that we charge. They see expenses for roadways and fire service.
Okay, and it doesn't show on this recap that we have here for the second assessment district, how, compared to the first assessment, which has the 199, and I'm assuming that's for the entire 12-month period.
Yep.
What do you know what the amount is for the second assessment?
I'd have to go pull it back up. I can actually probably pull this up here.
And has theirs already been paid?
Theirs, I believe, has already been paid. They're on different billing cycles. The city of Brainerd actually bills us twice in a year. We've always elected to pay the full amount at one shot, so it's cleared and out of the system. And city of Aiken does it a little different. Second assessment here. I will double check on that. There's very little expenses in here, so I don't know that we have paid that one as of yet. So I'll double check on that and I'll let you know what the rate is. Any other questions on first or second assessment?
Nope.
All right. And with that, just an update on finance as a whole. The audit is mostly complete. We did send our final draft to them. The final draft went yesterday. It did make it through quality review, so we should be getting our comments and other follow-up documents here shortly. That will come before, in the past, we brought that before the board chair first, and then to board with what those findings are. And we anticipate to do that next month, assuming everything comes out of CLA appropriately. Staff has worked pretty hard to get the financials updated and completed, and I know they've beat their head against the wall a few times because the auditors keep coming back with, well, we want this change, well, we want that little change, and this little change, and they were very happy yesterday to send that final in, so I actually have Corey off today and tomorrow, and I think that was partly why. And Emily had an appointment this morning, so she's working from home. So I think they both were very excited that one's done. Outside of that, we continue to watch the ARPA funds for guidance there, continue to work with our community partners and our associations to get a better understanding of where that's going and what to expect there, and continue plugging away at the normal everyday activities. We did add a staff member. We did have Amy Getty leave us last month. We do now have Angie in place. She started on Monday, and she will be doing our payroll and AP and is catching on fairly quickly. She does come to us from Aiken County, where she worked on the HR side there. Prior to that, she did have a lot of payroll experience with the school district as well with the Grand Casino organization. So we think we got a pretty good person to fill that void and get us back on track with our payroll and AP side.
Very good.
Otherwise, any questions that you have for us or me?
No questions. Administrator Hool, your truck is okay? You're okay? For now.
Is that it?
That's it, I think.
Just one thing before.
Oh, there
we-
is some additional stuff.
Before we end, I know that the chair, that Mr. Chairman, this was probably an oversight on your part on Tuesday, but I'm sure you forgot that June is National Camping Month, and you didn't point that out at our meeting, so I just
apologize,
wanted to let you know that. And then Tuesday, it was Best Friends Day, National Day, and then today is actually Iced Tea Day.
Okay.
National Day. So I just wanted to
Drink a cup.
I wanted to point that out. I'm trying to help you out, actually.
Well, June is PTSD month also recognition, so we should
Yeah.
acknowledge that, and that's a
And then
huge concern for us. And
one more thing. This is for Therese. You know what this song is?
No.
You ever heard this song?
No.
and with that, our meeting is over.
One more payment and I'm done.
Yep.